and welcome to your Construction Safety Association of Manitoba's 2024 Safety and Health Week virtual webinar series. Safety and Health Week is a continent-wide event spanning the countries of Canada, US, and Mexico. And the goal of the Safety and Health Week is to focus the attention of employers, employees, partners, and the public on the importance of preventing injury and illness in the workplace, at home, and in the community. My name is Megan Story, and I am the Training and Development Manager here at the Construction Safety Association of Manitoba. We are proud to be recognized as your premier and trusted source of safety and health information, resources, training, and core certification. Today's Safety and Health Week virtual webinar is an example of how we are striving to provide you with practical and relevant information, resources, training, and to prevent accidents in your workplace. For those of you who know CSAM, quite simply, our answer is yes. How can we help? We will have the answers to your questions, or we will find the answer with the help of our qualified resources and partners in safety and health. Today, I am pleased to introduce Jennifer Willems and Lindsay Gillson, who will discuss the reasons for having a return to work program and provide industry-specific statistics to support those reasons. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of Jennifer and Lindsay's presentation will be made available. Jennifer and Lindsay will also be able to answer questions during the presentation, so feel free to add those questions into the chat, and Jennifer and Lindsay will be able to answer those as they go through their presentation. At this time, I would like to pass this off to Jennifer and Lindsay. The screen is all yours, Jennifer and Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Megan. Sorry, I'm a little slow on the draw. I'm Jennifer Willems. We are here from the WCB. Our department name is Return to Work Program Services. I am pleased to be here with my best coworker, Lindsay Gillson. We are here to help employers. Our role in our job is to help employers improve their return to work programs to minimize the impact of injuries to both employers and workers. We're going to be super informal. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. The information that we're providing today really comes from the Institute of Work and Health. They've done a ton of research, so we're happy to share their information with you about how to have a successful return to work program and how to incorporate these 7 principles into your return to work planning. So when we talk about the return to work program, that's the whole thing. That's your processes. The return to work plan is when we look at an individual specifically. So that's kind of the difference when we chit chat with you today. The information that we're going to provide is also going to be a tool for you to use for your return to work program. The information is general, so we always recommend and encourage you to get legal advice if you're thinking about making any big changes to your programs. And with no further ado, I'm going to ask Lindsay to get started with you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lindsay Gillson. I am also a return to work consultant here at the WCB, and I'm helping Jennifer out here today. So as she mentioned, we will get started with the nitty-gritty of information. And yeah, please feel free to chat a question. Jen and I are extremely informal, and so we like to answer those questions as we go. So she'll be monitoring the chat while I'm talking and kind of alert me, hopefully, as these questions come up. So feel free to do that. All right. So we're going to start off with before we get into those 7 principles of a return to work program, we're going to talk first about some reasons for establishing a return to work program. And there's 3 main reasons that you see up on your screen there: moral, legal, and financial. I always, when I'm consulting with an employer or when I'm providing training, I always urge employers to start with the moral reasons for having a program. What might those moral reasons be? Well, simply put, it's the right thing to do. It's good for your workers. It's good for your workplace overall. If you start from the moral standpoint, and I know it's sometimes human nature too to think of that financial piece, our rates are so high, we need to find a way to cut costs, we need to find a way to save money. But if you start out with that financial piece as your priority, quite often the moral side of things tends to deteriorate, at which point your program really doesn't take off very well. If that's the perception that an employer is just trying to save money versus my employer is trying to take care of me and prevent injuries, you're far more likely to succeed. If you start with the moral, I promise you the financial piece will come. If you start with the financial, you might be slower to see some of those great benefits of having a return to work program, or you might not. So I mentioned moral, it's the right thing to do. When it's carried out appropriately, it can have a significant impact to the culture and morale within your workplace. Again, the focus should be prevention. Let's see if we can prevent injuries first. And of course, if not, having a return to work program is a great way to help mitigate those costs. And whenever I say costs or Jennifer says costs, it's just not dollars and cents. There's other costs associated with workplace injuries as well, right? Now, and I can't stress enough that if you focus solely on the financial piece, how this might negatively impact not only your program might not be successful, but it can impact the morale, result in less than favorable outcomes for your program. People feel connected to the workplace if they feel like they're just being forced back to work because the employer is trying to save some money. The overall culture of your workplace can deteriorate as well. So just really consider those things. Yes, financial is important. There is no doubt about that, but let's just get you there on the right track. Now, in the middle of that is legal. So there are some legal obligations too, which apply. That may require an employer to try to find or provide an accommodation. So for example, there are certain obligations under the Workers' Compensation Act, one of which is called the reemployment obligation. And of course, there's also other entities out there, such as human rights and things like that, that an employer has to consider when assessing return to work. All right. And of course, now onto the financial piece there. Of course, there are financial benefits for return to work, and that includes both for the worker as well as an employer. When we think of financial, I mean those direct benefits for an employer, obviously their WCB rate, the premiums that they're paying, right? But also for a worker, because generally speaking, if a worker is back in the workplace, they're earning 100% of their income. Whereas if they're on WCB benefits, they're not. We don't pay 100%. So there's some financial benefits to workers as well. Those are just the direct things. Other than that, there's the indirect, right? So, for an employer, from a financial perspective, if you have somebody off work, you now have to make sure you have somebody to fill in. Right? So that could be training costs, hiring costs, recruitment costs. There's lots of paperwork involved. All of that is costs as well, and it may be an indirect fashion. So just be mindful of that. All right. Now, for those of you who may or may not know, WCB is 100% employer funded. So our employers are paying 100% through their premiums and their rates. It's not something that is deducted from a worker's paycheck or where we get government funding from or anything like that. We operate just like an insurance company. So the more an employer uses our insurance or costs our system, the more they pay, right? The biggest driver of those costs is time loss. That is the biggest driver. And it's also something as an employer, you have some control over in certain scenarios, right? Let's, on that financial piece, let's take a look at how CSAM members are impacting the WCB system. So up here we have our little graph of time loss claims. So this is WCB time loss injuries, which resulted in time loss only for CSAM members. Okay, so it's leaving out everybody else in the province. So this is just specific to CSAM members. So as you can see here, days lost in 2022, we don't get our 2023 stats till June, so we're just a little bit short on that. So we're 1,251 injuries. All right, so we had 1,251 time loss injuries for CSAM members, and of that, those claims in that year sustained 26,067 days of time loss. All right, that's specific to you guys. Now, that interesting to note that 1,251 time loss claims, that accounts for 9% of all time loss claims in the province. So CSAM members account for 9% of time loss claims. All right. The total days lost in 2022 as a result of CSAM member claims for all years. So keep in mind that we have the 26,000 days represents time lost days for claims that injuries that happened in 2022. However, there's injuries that happened previously that still had time loss in 2022. Okay, so maybe some long-term claims, right? So the total days lost overall was 104,154 days. That's a lot. As you can see there, that number equates to over 416 years of full-time work in 1 year. In 1 year, all right?
Sorry, I was just going to say that also, those days are specific to CSAM members. So those are people that have skilled labor within your specific industries, right? They're not just missing from healthcare, they're missing specifically from you guys.
Yeah, exactly. So, and here's just a little bit of a breakdown for you to kind of see. So these are the classifications of our CSAM members. The WCB divides employers into different classifications. So you can see those classifications at the bottom there. They're all highlighted there for you. And you can see that there's certain areas where time loss is more prevalent, and that just might be due to the nature of the work that they do. It might also be, small, medium, large employers. Prevention methods might be a little bit different from preventing injuries, but also a small employer often finds it harder to find an accommodation for a worker. There isn't a lot to pull from. Generally speaking, the larger an organization is, the easier it is to find an accommodation for a worker when that comes up. So we have wrecking and moving as it looks like it's our highest. Constructing dams looks like second highest, and then tower and energy over there is the third. So just a little bit to kind of draw some attention to where maybe some of that is. And again, it might be severity of injury, it might be the size of the employer. There's a number of reasons why that might be. Okay. I'm gonna pass. Yeah, for sure.
Holly Adams has her hand up, so maybe Holly, if you'd like to ask your question, feel free to.
Are you there, Holly?
She's muted, I think.
Oh, all good. She didn't mean to do that. All good. Keep us on our toes, Holly. Keep us on our toes. It's all good.
We were hopeful, Holly, that you were going to be our first question asker. Okay, so hopefully that as we go through these 7 principles, especially in those smaller industries or those more physical jobs, you might be able to pick up some things that are helpful to your type of business as well. So first of all, the first principle is organizational commitment. And this one is so important. It's all about coming from the top. making return to work important from the top down. And it has to be visible. One of the things that happens is employers say, oh yeah, this is really important to us. Return to work matters. We really want to take care of our workers once they've been injured. And they put a resource or two on it. And then, oh, we're too busy to deal with it. So they're really saying, yeah, it's important, but it's not as important as this or that. We're just going to keep pulling the resources off. So when you think about organizational commitment, if you're that person, are you showing that commitment? How are you showing that commitment? Are you putting the needed time and resources in place? And honestly, financially, again, the resources that you need to show organizational commitment are virtually none. The only financial piece you might want to show is, do we need to have a person to be our resident expert? But other than that, the only thing that you need to do to show that it's a priority is to keep moving that forward. The second principle is safe and suitable work. So it's important that an employer offers safe and suitable work to their worker when the worker's been off, either injured or ill. And we say due to a workplace injury, but essentially anytime. The accommodation should be available to all workers at any time. So safe is pretty easy. Is the work safe for the worker? Well, if it falls within their documented abilities, absolutely, it's going to be safe. But what is suitable? So suitable is something that they can reasonably be expected to be able to do with training. So sometimes, in order to provide an appropriate accommodation, you actually have to take some time and train the person. How are you going to know if the work is suitable for somebody? Well, I'd say ask. The problem with not asking is sometimes we make assumptions about the guy's just a general laborer. Well, maybe the guy's a mechanic in his spare time. Maybe the guy runs his own income tax business on the side. If you don't ask, you don't know what their other abilities are outside of what they do for you. So you want to make sure that you include the worker in this process by asking, do you think this would be suitable, or what other skills do you have? My favorite example of unsuitable is I work at Home Depot. I work in appliances, and it's a really physical job, and I have a back injury, so I have to go to lighter work. So they put me in the paint department and they say, go sort those paint chips, Jennifer. And I go and do it, and the supervisor comes back and all the blues and greens are mixed up. And they said, what's wrong with you? Oh, I'm colorblind. Nobody asked me. They didn't ask, is that suitable for you? They just assumed that because it was safe, it was also suitable. So another thing about the safe and suitable work is the balance of work. You have to make sure you have enough to keep their shift full, because you don't want them getting bored or wandering around, because once you wander, you start to visit. And once you start to visit, it looks like you're not working. And then what do other people think about the return to work program? Well, they think, oh yeah, they just come in and walk around and do nothing. Well, that's not going to help your program. So make sure they have enough work, but they can't have too much work either. That's overwhelming for them. It's discouraging for them. If they are already feeling like they're not contributing, by piling on the work or having an unrealistic amount of work, that's not going to really make them feel good about what they're doing, and they may just give up and think, like, I just can't do it. So another thing about safe and suitable work is to be prepared. So consider compiling a list of possible duties. You go to a job site, and it's a brand new job site to you. Take a look around. What do we have that's maybe sedentary? What if the guy comes to me and says, I can only lift up to 10 pounds? What if I can't do any overhead work? What are the environmental constraints? Are they working in cold or hot? Or at heights. So think about those things and what might be available if a person came to you and said that they had a workplace injury. So classify your work tasks, talk to other supervisors, your lead hands, and guess who else? Talk to your workers, because those are the people that would end up being the ones doing the job and probably know the jobs as well as you do. So if it's not possible to provide a full day of safe and suitable work, you only have a few things that the person can do, graduated or return to work's okay too. Give them some part hours, keep them involved and engaged, and that will help you with your return to work.
It also helps with their recovery, so they will recover faster.
And interesting to that, thanks, Linz, because that's a controlled work environment, right? You're controlling what they're doing. If I'm off at home, you have no idea what I'm doing. At least in this respect, you're helping them to recover because you're controlling their amount of activity or what they're participating in through the day. So that's really important. Principle 3, a supportive workplace culture. So the person in charge of the return to work planning should really do their best to ensure that the return to work program supports the returning worker without putting other workers within their team at a disadvantage. So if Lindsay's injured and she comes back to work and she gets what I consider to be all the light work and I have to do all the heavy work, I'm going to be a lot less supportive. Now, having said that, I really like Lindsay, not even just for the purposes of this presentation. I do really like Lindsay. So I am bound to be more supportive because I like her. So what you encounter sometimes in the workplace is, we got that guy we don't like. Things are actually better when he's not there. I'm not going to lie. There are those people in the workplace. But the problem is, if I'm injured, I'm not changing the kind of worker I am. I'm not going to all of a sudden get injured and be this really gung-ho kind of worker, fantastic coworker. You get what you get. So on that note, you have to remember that whatever you've, as a supervisor, put up with behavior-wise up to that point, you're probably not going to see improvement at the time that the person's returning to work. And you might have to have some patience with that. So another thing is that coworkers will better support the returning worker if they've got some information around what's going on with that person. Now, I'm not saying share their diagnosis or share what you know, but when the person's ready to return, it's helpful to say to the team, Jennifer's coming back. She's been away for 6 months. Jennifer asked me to tell you that she only has specific job tasks that she can do for the first month. So just don't ask her to do anything. We'll let you know as those things change. One of the main reasons people work outside of their abilities is because somebody has asked them to, and they don't want to rock the boat, and they don't want to say no, and they don't want to not pull their weight, and they don't want to impact their team. So anything you can do to prevent that from happening is going to come across as a supportive workplace culture, but also it makes sure that the worker's not doing more than they should. The other thing that happens is, if I'm the go-to person and I always say yes to everything, and then poor Megan has to ask me, Jennifer, could you do this? And I say, no, I've put Megan in a bad situation too. She's frustrated because she wasn't aware that I shouldn't be doing it. She's wasted her time asking and maybe frustrated at me for not being able to do it. So there's a lot that goes into that supportive workplace culture. And it's important to think about that. And one of Lindsay's key principles that she's going to talk about also really is what's going to help you to provide a supportive workplace culture. So principle 4, oh, here's a big one. If you're a supervisor, it is sure helpful to know what you're supposed to do, not have to wing it, right? I want to know what's expected of me as a supervisor. Well, how do I get there? How do I know what I'm supposed to do when it comes to return to work? I'm going to need some training. I need to be involved, particularly if the injured worker is coming back to my department. Not only do I need to be involved in what work will they be provided, but what entails safe and suitable? How do I create that safe work culture and supportive work culture? So if a supervisor is left out of the return to work planning process, they may end up being told, oh, Jennifer's going to come back and she's going to do filing. I don't have any filing. Now I'm resentful that I'm getting saddled with a person who can't do what I need. I probably know what I need done, and I can probably rejig that as a supervisor to make sure that I can provide something to Jennifer that's safe and suitable. So same way you want to engage the worker, you also want to engage the supervisor. What happens is supervisors are sometimes promoted through the ranks just because they've got staying power, right? They've come in, they've spent 20 years there. They've never actually been trained to have any supervisory skills, but they've stayed long enough that it's their turn. So it's important to be sure that you are providing them with training. It might include what's their role in return to work. They might have even been an injured worker at one time, but their role as an injured worker is entirely different than what you're going to expect them to do as a supervisor. It's exactly the same way when we talk about their injury reporting. They may know how to report an injury as a worker, but they may not understand what the next steps are as a supervisor if they've never had that training. Communication strategies for supervisors are really important. What to say, how to say things, and that it's okay to talk to workers. That's a really good piece for training for supervisors, again, whether it's related to the return to work program or not. Another thing that supervisors need to know is if the person's off work, do I talk to them? Is that my job? How often do I do that? How do I document those conversations? How do I resolve any return to work issues when my worker comes to me and says, this isn't working for me? And the final piece of that is if I the supervisor who's in charge of providing a functional ability form, when does that happen? How do I know if I'm the person who's supposed to be doing it? Those are things that supervisors need to be trained to do. Not only once, multiple times, right? We don't train somebody by telling them something once. Has to be multiple times. All right. I am turning this over to Lindsay.
Okay, yeah, and just to add on that training, like what she means by multiple times is refresher training. There's a lot of, I've done a lot of work with some construction organizations in the province, and quite often their leadership there's already a process for refresher training. Some of it's every year, some of it's every 3 years. So and quite often there's a safety proponent and things like that, different topics that are included in that. But more often than not that I've found, actually I don't think I've ever found that the return to work program is part of that refresher training. So incorporate that into your supervisor refresher training as well, so that it remains fresh, right? Because we have to remember too, and I mean, hopefully this is the case for a lot of people. It's obviously not, but you might not have an injury reported to you on a regular basis. You might not be dealing with return to work matters on a regular basis. I mean, there's things in my own job where I'm like, oh, I don't do this on a monthly basis. I don't remember what to do, but I know where to go to find that information so that I know what my responsibilities are. And that's what's key, right? That refresher training and a place to access this information, so that I can be reminded of what I need to do and so that I can do it right. Okay. Um, Okay, communication. So this is principle 5. And I mean, it says specific to proactive communication with the worker. And I am going to speak to that, but I'm also going to speak to communication on a much bigger level. It's quite honestly the most important principle out of all 7 by far. It is woven into each step of the program, as well as when you are doing individual return to work planning. You can have the best program, processes, and the best intentions for your workers on paper or in theory. But if you don't have good communication to support it and roll that out, your results will be, or your results may, and more than likely will be subpar. All right. And in fact, in a lot of situations, it can actually be communication can be the one detrimental thing to not only your program, but your workplace morale and culture too, right? And I'll give you an example of an employer that I worked with. It was a very large employer. It was divided in the province in half. And they had 2 dedicated return to work coordinators. I think they were actually in HR roles. One looked after half and the other looked after the other half of the province. Okay. And same paperwork, same policies, same process. Everything was identical and it was pristine on paper. All right. I found that through my consultation, one side was doing really, really well. Their time loss days were low, things were good, people were happy. On the other side, their return to works were not going well. They were having a lot more time loss days, and the workers that I spoke to were just generally unhappy about the whole idea of return to work and kind of digging in their heels and had this very negative perception. So upon my digging, I found that it was the approach. It was the communication. So the return to work coordinator on the side where things were going well, guess what? That person was starting these conversations. How are you? Sorry this happened. We're here to support you. Know that we have a return to work program. We're going to be constantly evaluating to see if we can provide you an accommodation. Is there anything that you need in the meantime? Here's what our expectations are. Do you have any questions? Right? On the other side, that return to work coordinator, when they were calling their staff that were off work or had an injury, there was no how are you? It was, did you get the FAF? You did? Okay. Where is it? Because I don't have it back yet. Right? So people on that side, it was a cold experience, a cold communication experience, right? On the other side, they felt cared for by their employer, right? And just in that type of communication, I mean, I can say if somebody called me and said, first words were, did you get the FAF? How come I don't have it back yet? I'd be like, I got hurt working for you. If you think I'm just going to buy into this now because you're talking to me like that, I'm actually far more likely to dig in my heels, right? And want to be staying at home because that's going to create some negative feelings in me as a worker, right? And I get that sometimes we have to fake it. I can appreciate that, but just know that how you approach those conversations are really important. And sometimes, the cold side, that cold approach, it's not always intentional to be cold, okay? I think sometimes people get stuck in their processes. A return to work coordinator has a process too. They're checking boxes. They need to know what they do. And sometimes we get so focused on, did we do this? Did we do this? Is it back by then? That we forget about the human side of things. So just try to remember that in your conversations, in your emails. Have you ever typed an email? I know I've done this. I've typed out an email and then I read it before I send it. And I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be perceived the way I'm meaning it to be perceived. So then I pick up the phone and then it's a conversation so that I can make sure that my point is made with the right intonation and there's no undertone which might be perceived in an email, right? So just consider some of those things.
One of the things we often hear too on that note of Lindsay saying, pick up the phone. Then people say, but then I don't have any documentation. So I, like Lindsay, I'm a firm believer in pick up the phone because that's the tone you want. You want that kind, caring, compassionate tone. It's like when you use Siri in your car and you're going to work and you're like, I do this every morning. I text my boyfriend. This morning I said, this is how I talk to Siri. I'm so excited. I get to do this hour lunch and learn with CSAM today. And Siri says, I am so excited. I get to do this 1 hour lunch and learn with CSAM today. That wasn't what I said. It's not even how I talk. So that tone is really important. Now, if you want that follow-up documentation, Lindsay and I have a conversation. I ask her how she's doing. I make sure she's improving. I ask her if there's any supports. I find out when her next appointment is. And then I shoot her off an email saying, thanks for chatting with me. I'm so happy to hear that you're improving. I know you said you have an appointment on Thursday, so we'll chat again on Friday at 9 o'clock. And we'll see if there's any opportunity for you to come back to work at that time, right? So you're following it up with an email, but she's already got that kind, considerate, compassionate feeling from our conversation.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just it just really promotes the success of your program. People are far more likely to be willing to come back to work. They still may not like it, but right? I get that. But you know, I feel that if you approach it from a colder, more negative side of things, or if it's perceived that way, people are more likely to dig in their heels and maybe request from their doctors more time off. I can't go back, or, you know, because they just don't have that will to go back. They don't feel like they're wanted in the workplace, or whatever it might be, right? So communication can help to overcome that. It's a vital piece to your program development, program orientation, your ongoing training. Remember, we're saying have that refresher training, especially for your leadership, but you can also do that for your staff. It's vital to communicating what roles and responsibilities are for the various stakeholders. It's vital to create program engagement, right? Talking about the program, resolving challenges, so how you're going to do that, as well as organizational commitment. It's not just about making sure information is shared, but consideration has to be given to, as Jennifer alluded to, you know, what you say, how you say it, at each and every one of these communication moments, as I call it, right? And just, I mentioned organizational commitment and how important communication is there. And Jennifer talked about that. That was the very first principle. And so how do you communicate that organizational commitment, for example? So that's that. And when we say organizational, that's from the top to the bottom, right? But it starts with that visible leadership commitment. And so that can be demonstrated and communicated in ways such as sharing of goals, right? You're not necessarily sharing numbers with people. I understand that's information that leadership might not want to share, but you can still share some of your goals in general overall numbers or general terms, communicating milestones, right? And communicating in the way of inviting feedback or ideas, participation in meetings and discussions, things like that. So that's how that communication would tie in at that organizational commitment level. All right. So we've touched on 5 principles so far. And I mentioned that communication is important for all of them. It's also very important for the next 3 that are coming. Are we at 3 or 2? See, my math is horrible. There's 2 more. There's 2 more. Oh, you're on mute, Jem.
I just want to throw in on communication as well. Knowing how often to reach out to a worker. Are you getting there?
Yeah.
Did I ruin it? Okay, I'm going to let Lindsay talk about that.
I just gave her a dirty look. That was communication, nonverbal. See, that can impact things too. You might be saying very happy thoughts out loud, but if you're rolling your eyes while you say it, nonverbal communication too. Perfect example. Thanks for that, John. So, and when we talk about, so the topic here was proactive communication with the worker. So that means training workers before they need access to the return to work program, not just at the time that they're injured, right? Let them know this information ahead of time. This gives them some idea of the process and lessens the uncertainties about what happens should they ever have an injury in the workplace. It also prepares them in advance that the expectation is not necessarily that if they get hurt at work, that they're going to be at home until they're fully recovered, right? It gives them that in advance so that they know in advance that, oh, there's a chance I might be coming back to light duties or alternate duties, right? So that's really important too. So yes, as Jennifer also brought up there has to be a communication strategy with a worker too. There has to be an outline of what the expectations are. So identifying whose role it is to remain in communication with a worker, an injured worker, whether they're on light duties or if they're off work, whose role is it? How often are they going to be in communication with a worker? How? Is it phone, text, email, in person? What's your expectation? I think I got lost in my train of thought, but those are things to consider, right? So quite often, if somebody is off work, it'll be your return to work coordinator. We're using that term. You might have a different term for that title who handles that in your workplace. But quite often that's generally who it is. And, it's, whether it's weekly or maybe according to their medical appointments, so you can get those updates. Just make sure you're consistent, right? So don't do something for one worker and something different for another. There has to be flexibility given the scenario, no doubt. But if you have two workers who have the same injury and you're having one worker, you're contacting them every day, but the other worker you're only contacting weekly, for example, that could be viewed as a kind of just not discriminatory, but you're handling it differently, right? And that could create a very negative feeling. Now, given that somebody might have a sprained ankle and somebody might have a broken leg, of course, that communication might look different because the person with the broken leg likely is going to be off work, maybe a little bit longer, especially if they need surgery. So if they've had surgery today, you're not going to call them necessarily weekly, right? If you know they're going to be off work for 2 months until they can be accommodated with light duties, you might be in contact with them once every 2 weeks, right? But do keep contact, right? Don't say, oh, they're off for 2 months. We'll touch base in about 7 weeks, right? That's not what we want to see either. You want to keep that connection with the workplace. All right. Jennifer already mentioned too, communication should be timely, consistent, clear, and of course, just remember the kind aspect of communication and the nonverbal communication, as Jennifer and I learned today. And making sure that workers are aware of who will be contacting them. So for example, if it is the return to work coordinator's role, the worker might not even know who that person is. They might be at head office. These people work off site, right? On different sites. They might not even know who that person is. So, letting the worker know this is, Lindsay, she's our return to work coordinator. They will be contacting you likely weekly, but she'll make those arrangements for you, but just expect, that call. So making sure that workers are aware of that. If it is a supervisor role that's going to remain in contact with the worker, and quite often it's a little bit of both, because supervisors are friends sometimes with their workers who are with them, or they just want to do their thing and make sure that their staff are okay too. They want to touch base, and that's okay too. Just make sure those supervisors are updating the return to work coordinator with that information so that we always have that up-to-date communication. Whenever you are communicating any sort of time frame, we always say try to refrain from as soon as possible or regular communication. What does that mean? Because to one worker, as soon as possible could be immediately after a medical appointment. I'm calling my return to work coordinator. To others, that might be, well, my appointment's on a Friday morning and I'm heading straight out to the lake after that. So I'll call Monday or Tuesday, right? So just know that as soon as possible or regular is not specific enough. Have that specified, okay?
You just made me think that if I don't know who the return to work coordinator is, and I'm off work and I get a call and they say, I'm calling from HR versus I'm the return to work coordinator, how scared am I going to be if I'm worried about my job? If I don't know that that person is actually calling me in regard to my injury, my recovery, and to support me, I might be thinking I'm in trouble. So I liked that point you made about it should be communicated who's
the communicator.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Good. Okay. So on to principle number 6, dedicated return to work coordinator. So any successful return to work program is going to have somebody who is running the program or is kind of like the go-to person, the specialist, right? For lack of a better word. So it would be the return to work coordinator's responsibility to to coordinate the process of return to work. And quite often they oversee the whole program. So if there's going to be changes made to a program, things like that, that would be in their wheelhouse. And keep in mind too, you know, we talked about communication and establishing those timelines and all those sort of things. That is unique to your workplace, right? We're not here to say you should do this, this, or this within these timeframes. You need to figure out what works for your workplace and where you're located, right? So there's lots of different variances when we're talking about some of those things, the specifics, I should say. And in speaking to that, when we're talking about a return to work coordinator, some organizations have this as an internal role, where others have it as an external role. So it's kind of up to you. You need to figure out what's going to work best for you. Some organizations contract that out, just like their payroll piece. You know, it's better than not having anybody do it, for sure. It's kind of up to you. So as an organization, you would have to evaluate pros and cons of each to figure out what's going to work for you. Same thing. It can be a full-time role. It could be a part-time role. Or maybe it's a full-time role who wears multiple hats. So the return to work portion might not be their entire job. They might be a safety person. They might be an HR person. They might have other duties, right? That encompasses their day. All right. Keep in mind too that the responsibilities of the return to work coordinator, I mean, it doesn't mean that they have to do everything when facilitating a return to work plan. They can be the person who is the resource when needed. For some organizations, the return to work coordinator handles everything from start to finish. So they are the person who develops the return to work plan, implements it, and does all the follow-up, right? And the supervisor is just there to oversee the plan. For other organizations, it works better if the supervisor facilitates that piece with their worker. They develop the return to work plan. They oversee the worker, and they just report back to the return to work coordinator with all of that information and those updates, right? And in that situation, the return to work coordinator is the one who maintains that file, because we always say keep a file of each injury for each worker. They're the one who communicates with the WCB to provide us with those updates. They file the reports with WCB and then oversee the plan progress on behalf of the supervisor, right? And is there, if there's any challenges that the return to work or that the supervisor isn't able to smooth out with the worker. All right. And it's, you know, it's sometimes there's more than one. Sometimes there's too many drivers on the bus. Just be leery of that, and nobody knows who's doing what, and you assume that the other person is doing it all when nothing's getting done. So just be aware of some of those scenarios that can come up. And principle 7 is processes to identify and review a worker's abilities. So it's pretty darn difficult to find an accommodation for a worker if you don't know what they're capable of doing, right? So we have on the screen here a functional ability form. This is something that you can also find on our website. It is a free resource. You can take it and print it off our website. Please remove the sample watermark before using it. But you can also take it and change it, adapt it to meet your needs. So check out our website because there's a variety of resources on top of this as well. This is just a sample of how you might obtain a worker's abilities from their healthcare provider. In the best programs, the employer does this proactively rather than waiting for the WCB to provide the worker's abilities. Quite often, you're going to get it from the healthcare provider before you're going to get it from the WCB because it takes the healthcare provider a little bit longer to get those reports into the WCB. Not always, but generally speaking. Yeah, so we called this a functional ability form. I've heard physical capabilities form. I've heard so many different names for it. What you call it is fine. Avoid using the term medical on the form because it is not in fact medical. You're just requesting abilities. Try to keep it short and sweet. I've seen some that are like 4 pages long. Either the healthcare provider won't complete it or they're going to charge you $600 for doing so. So keep that in mind. Some of the things that, you should consider when you are having this form is, a lot of employers will have the workers sign off, authorizing the healthcare provider to provide this information to the employer. That's not needed. You can have it there if you want, but it could be a barrier because what if a worker decides not to sign it? But in the end, you are not requesting medical information, so you don't in fact require a worker's authorization. The other thing is that you might want to consider covering the charge. If there is a fee for the completion of this form, they're usually not too expensive. I've heard anywhere $25 to $40. It depends on how long your form is. But then you just avoid those scenarios where maybe a worker doesn't want to pay or isn't able to pay for the form completion. So that is helpful. And letting workers know that up front. There are so many organizations that I work with and we say, yeah, we cover the charge. And when you talk to the workers, they're like, no, I paid out of pocket. I had no idea. So let your workers know when you're providing the form, if there's a fee, we will cover it or we will reimburse you for it. That's really important, making sure your workers know that. Also on this form, just letting the healthcare provider know that you can accommodate with modified or alternate duties. And then letting the worker know, or you have to establish a process. When is the form provided to the worker? Ideally, it's at the time of reporting their injury, by the way. Whose responsibility it is to provide it. I mentioned the payment part. When does it need to be returned to the employer? I'd set a specific time frame. Within 2 days of it being completed or within 2 days of it being provided, I should say. That was what I meant to say, not being completed. Who does the worker return it to? How? Do you want them to return it in person? Can they email it? Things like that. All right, and now I'm going to pass it over to Jennifer because I want to leave some time for questions if we can.
There was one other thing I wanted to say about the functional ability form. Don't attach a job description. There's no point. The provider is not going to read their job description. And suppose you're not actually putting them back to their regular duties. You might be putting them back to something that's really light or super alternate, or you're able to really modify that work. So providing them with their job description really says to the worker, oh, this is what I'm coming back to. Well, it's not. We're not prepping you to come back to that. It's baby steps. So that's one of my little pet peeves is when employers say, yeah, we attach the job description, and I think, oh, honey, no. All right. So the last thing that we're providing in here is we're providing a journey map. It's a process map. So it's something that you can take and post up if you want. And it talks to you about kind of what is the process and what does that look like. And one of the interesting things is if you go back through the principles, all of the principles apply through these phases, right? If the first one is providing transportation when an injury occurs, well, that shows a supportive workplace culture. Another step is for the supervisor to give the injured worker package. Well, that's the supervisor being trained to do that, and also the ability to identify those abilities. So every step of these, again, is proactive communication. The supervisor notifying the coordinator that the worker is missing time from work, that the injury has occurred, having a connection with the worker who's off work. Again, and then the gray part, you know, talking about safe and suitable work. The return to work coordinator works with the supervisor to identify that safe and suitable work. Again, you know, more proactive communication, monitoring the worker's progress by asking, again, we got to have conversation. So asking for follow-up from both the worker and the supervisor. The return to work coordinator needs to know those things to know, are we doing it well, right? How do we improve if we don't know what's going on, right? So all of the principles will apply through the whole process map, but the process map is a really easy way for you to identify kind of the next steps and what we should expect. And it's also, if you post it in the workplace, not only will you know what the next steps would be, but the workers have some better idea, again, of what to expect. So we started with the theme of getting an injured worker well. Return to work helps to get them well. And this is kind of how we feel about it. And we're ready for questions if you have any.
And just one quick thing to add too. This is just a snippet of our return to work basics, right?
Thank
a
you.
quick lunch and learn. So if you are interested in attending the full WCB basics or return to work basics, log on to, or just check out our website, and all our dates of our classes are available to you there as well. The question floor is open if anyone has any questions.
That just means you answered every question they could have ever had, Lindsay. Good job. Awesome.
Thanks, Jennifer, Lindsay. I'm not going to, there is one here. And as people are thinking about it, I'm not going to cut you off. But let's take a look at this question here from Tanya. Do you see that, Jennifer?
I sure do. So Tanya's asking, if you have a seasonal job and you're hurt near the end of the season, how will it affect the rates? It depends. This is our pat answer, by the way. If you ever think you are not getting the right answer from the WCB, this is our answer always. It depends. So it depends on what the person's status is or recovery status is at the time that the layoff would have occurred. So could they be out job hunting? Could they have the same advantages as everybody else who's laid off? That kind of determines, do we continue to pay them? If we continue to pay them until they're recovered, then there may be some impact on your rates because you will be accumulating some costs. But, you know, if it's only a few days after that we're paying them, then it's probably not going to have a huge impact. So what we always recommend is, if it is a seasonal job, if there's any way that you're able to bring them back to do some modified work, then you're always better to do that if you can. Again, even if it's outside their regular duties, because there will be no need for the WCB to continue paying them. And then when they're recovered, they would be treated like everyone else. Anything to add there, Lindsay?
Yeah, one thing just to add too is that we may also just take a look at what past history has been for that particular worker. So for example, if they're seasonal, but in the winter they do snow removal, maybe they're laid off and then they go to a snow removal company, for example, we're going to ask them that, right? Or if for the last 15 years they're laid off and they collect EI during that layoff period, that might also affect our decision to pay, right? So it just kind of depends. There's a few factors that would be involved. So there would definitely be some more questions for the worker and things that we'd have to investigate. So it's a really great question.
Sorry about that. I mute so that you don't get echo and then I forget. The question is, a lot of our return to works are non-work related. We have many that would rather just take sick time, or those that are work related would rather stay on WCB. Do they have to come back to work if there's an accommodation? So I'm going to speak to WCB related. If there is a concern about the person, you're feeling like the person is ready to come back and they're putting up some roadblocks, you definitely want to involve the claim owner. That would be the WCB adjudicator or case manager. They don't have to come back to work. Even if we say they're ready to, if they choose not to return to work, the teeth that the WCB has in that situation is to stop their wage loss benefits. So if you're fit to come back to work and you choose not to go back to work on a work-related claim, the WCB will just say, okay, that's up to you, but we have to stop paying you. In a non-work-related situation, that's going to be covered under human rights, and there are some obligations of the employer and the workers under that legislation. So you're best to, you know, kind of call and find out what they have to say about that. We don't like to comment on their situation. Lindsay, what would you like to add to that?
No, I think I'm good.
Then there's another question here from Tanya. Would EI trump WCB?
No, we're the first payer. Oh, am I muted? No, I'm not muted. Perfect. We are the first payer. So if a worker has a workplace injury, we are going to pay them until such time as we say, our phrasing is they don't have a loss of earning related to their injury. That's how we say it. So whether that means you've provided them with full-time hours in accommodation or whether they've fully recovered. So in that situation, Tanya, where you asked, like, what if they're at the point of layoff? WCB is going to be the first payer. And when we determine that they're no longer entitled to any wage loss, then they can flip to EI. They can't do both at once, and we would be the first payer. Awesome.
Excellent. Well, thank you all. I'm going to just switch over to my screen here. So Jennifer, if I can get you just to unshare, that's excellent. And I'll just bring up our slides here as well. Hopefully you can all see that in front of you. I just wanted to highlight a couple things as I have everyone's attention. We do have some training coming up in May at the end of the month in the Paw and Thompson. So if you have work sites up there and are interested in some training, please check out our website for more information on that training. We also have a very amazing app that if you don't already have on your smartphone, please look at downloading that. It is free and has great information. We also have a lot of resources on our website to do with training, specifically to toolbox talks. And if that's of interest to you, check out our website for that information. Another item on our website is the safety scene. So that is really your one-stop shop to know what's going on in safety in the province. So check that out on our website. We are very active on social media, and that may be how you learned about this session today. So please feel free and continue to follow us there. And also here is your opportunity to share your feedback on today's session. So please take out your device and scan that QR code. That gives you an opportunity to tell us what you think about this session. You can find a drop-down menu to select the Safety and Health Week webinar, and then you can choose Jennifer and Lindsay's name and give us your feedback on today's session. So thank you so much for everyone's participation in today's session. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Lindsay, for the wealth of knowledge that you have shared with us today. This workshop or this session today will be made available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks, as well as a copy of the presentation will be emailed out to everyone that was registered for today's event. I do not see any other questions. So without seeing any more questions come up, that is all for today. Thank you again to everyone for being here, and we'll see you around soon. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure. Thanks, Megan. Take care.
Yeah. Bye-bye.